Alright, let's just jump into it. So, it's time to talk Mandela Mandala, whichever you prefer, and trying to figure out the purpose. And I guess I'm going to postulate that this is God's guide to knowing, and a way to awaken, make people aware of what the world is around them. So, start with, we're going to go through bullet points and just try to get through as many as possible. We'll start with, so in New York City, there's a famous structure, and you're going to visualize it before you hear it. So it's called Grand Central. So pause it if you need to. So if you answered Grand Central Station, you're like most of us, and remember that's what it is or was or whatever. Now, that's not what actually it has been called for 100 years. It is Grand Central Terminal. So the building has been built 3 times according to, I guess, official records. It originally was a depot, then it was renamed a station for 4 years, and then it became a terminal, and that has been 100 years. So when looking at it, it was obviously quite out there and bizarre, and I was going through Recall Vector's take on it, and he was going through all the newspaper articles trying to show that it's been called Grand Central Station, obviously, forever. And one of the things I came across was an article that talked about the orphan trains. And if you've been following that at all, you're knowing that a bunch of kids were removed from their parents' care, or if they were on the street, whatnot, in major cities all around the world, and this went on during the 19th and early 20th century. And it was just an odd thing to stumble across when you're looking at something about railroad. with Grand Central Station. Obviously, there's a link, but so this kind of goes out to Recall Vector and Jason Christopher. Try to see that there may be a underlying purpose to the Mandela to get you to focus on learning about something. So when these come up, usually it gets you to go down a rabbit hole where you're like, okay, well, what's the changes all about? But it can lead you to other things that maybe is what the purpose was, like the forfeit trains. So, all right, we're gonna just try to go through some bullet point stuff, and pause the tape if you have to. I guess we're going into spoiler territory, and if you're not wanting to spoil your memory without looking into it first. So, some famous lines that are missing from movies, TV shows. So, let's start with I Love Lucy. Most of you remember when Ricky would come home and he'd know that Lucy was up to trouble. He would say, "Lucy, you got a lot of splaining to do." And this was a common phrase that he would say over and over again. And it was funny because it was making fun of how he spoke and everything. And he knew that she was up to trouble and he was trying to find out what he had to deal with. And you can see the Mad TV spoof of it where they did the exact line, but it never was in the show. So, even though we all remember it. Alright, the next is George and Gracie. So George would say to Gracie at the end of the show, "Say goodnight, Gracie." So visualize what she would say. "Good night, Gracie." Well, it never occurred. And there's some plays on it where it never really is exactly that, "Good night, Gracie," but everyone remembers it. Even George remembers it years later. They do a parody about it. But then even in that parody afterward says that they never said it. But alright, so let's go on to Star Wars here for a second. So in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke and Vader are fighting, he confesses to Luke that he is his father. And the famous line that everyone remembers is, "Luke, I'm your father." And if you've watched it recently, you know that it says, "No, I am your father." And there's a different variation of it out there. "No, Luke, I am your father." But a lot of the cast, including James Earl Jones, remember "Luke, I'm your father." And if you want to search around on this one, you can find quite a bit about it. But anyway, so let's move on from that one. The other one is the famous line, "Beam me up, Scotty," from Star Trek, which was never uttered, but everyone remembers it. And I think you can kind of see a theme starting here as far as these lines kind of sum up an essence of a particular aspect of either the movie or the show, and something you can kind of gravitate to. Another one is so you have Lassie, and so somebody falls down the well, and you probably have heard about this one already, and somebody comes to get help. Well, what would be the common thing that you would think, since the show is about the dog coming and getting help for whatever happened? Well, if you look at the episode, Timmy is the one that comes and asks for help because Lassie fell down the well. But you can look at all the parodies about it, Simpsons and I think Family Guy, different places where they talk about, obviously, the old way that we remember it. Okay, so you got Field of Dreams out there, where the main character is trying to build it so that they can come, and now it is build it and he will come. So we're starting to get into maybe what the purpose of some of these are, as far as waking you up to what might be going on in our reality. So building it and he will come, I mean, this is extrapolation here a little bit, but fundamentally changes what it's about. And if you look at it spiritually, maybe we're talking about build it and God will come. Okay, moving on. So let's go on to Waterworld. And the famous line everyone remembers is that we're talking about land, dry land, okay? And the main character is saying that he's seen it, and this is a pivotal thing even in the preview. And the girl has a tattoo on her back that shows where dry land is, and it's basically saying that the main character has a little bit of knowledge about the world more than the regular people. And if you've ever seen the movie, you know more about it. But basically that line, I guess, doesn't exist anymore. So the other famous line that everyone loves, so you got E.T., and he points out the window and he's telling the kids, you know, basically what he needs to do. So he says, E.T., phone home. Well, as you may know if you've watched it recently, it does not say that anymore. It says E.T. home phone, which may not be a big deal, but it's still an odd thing since everyone's said it for 35 plus years. Alright, little Arnold here. So this one's not too big, but famous line from Terminator. I'll be back. Obviously, kind of a thick, strong, tough thing, and you know, summed up quite a bit about the character and how kind of a joking sort of thing, even though it's a machine. And now it says I'll be back, like very normal sounding, not memorable, so to speak, as much as the first version. And I mean, these aren't necessarily a big deal, but it's just changes the way you look at it. All right, let's move on to The Silence of the Lambs, which a lot remember Silence of the Lambs, which I'll get back to in a second. So the famous line that everyone really recalls is Hannibal saying, "Hello, Clarice." Well, as you may know already, never happened. And you can find memes and people reenacting something that obviously never happened. Now, as far as Silencing of the Lambs versus The Silence of the Lambs, I mean, it's not too drastic a change, but I think with both of these, it's pointing towards what Hannibal's all about, and maybe what problems we got in our own world that are pretty much like Hannibal, and what he likes to do to people, and how disgusting. So keep that in mind on why God might be pointing to that in particular. So another fun one, if you ever watch Lost in Space, the robot, a lot of times from our memory, would go, "Danger, danger, Will Robinson." Well, there was only one episode where that was actually uttered. There's a bunch where it says "Danger, Will Robinson," but people remember the arms wailing and him freaking out. And you can find memes of it too. All right, so if you ever seen Scary Movie, you know it's a parody movie. There's a point in the movie where Marlon Wayans is hiding under a blanket, and his friend comes up to him and he says a play on another movie. So the original movie was Sixth Sense. He said, in Sixth Sense it says, "I see dead people." And that was the little kid said that. So moving over to Scary Movie, Marlon Wayans is doing the same sort of thing, and grant you this came out not too far after the other movie, and he's like, "I see white people." Well, never happened, but yet we all remember it, and you can find it out online. Alright, moving on. Let's go on to Wizard of Oz. So the witch had all of her little flying monkeys, and everyone remembers her say, "Fly, my pretties, fly." Well, never happened. And not necessarily a big deal, but just kind of a famous scene that no longer exists. Alright. Let's move on to Forrest Gump. So there's a pretty famous line from this movie where Forrest is sitting on a bench talking to a stranger that comes and sits next to him, and he says to the woman that his mom always told him that life is like a box of chocolates. Well, the famous line is now, life was like a box of chocolates. So it's a small change, but I think you're kind of maybe seeing a pattern here that when you're going from is to was, that you're talking about in the past maybe life was like a box of chocolates, but maybe now in our current reality it was like a box of chocolates, and so maybe you do know what you're gonna get. Alright, moving on. Okay, so many people have watched Mr. Rogers, and you may already know this one. So he sings a song in the beginning, and he talks about, "It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood." Okay, so it currently is, "It's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful day in this neighborhood," which, you know, it's not a terrible change, but it makes it more closed in, saying that you're only talking about that neighborhood. And when you're saying the neighborhood, you're talking about, like, well, all of our neighborhoods, and it's more inclusive, whereas that's more, you know, just controlled to that particular story and where you're at, and just changes it. Oh, so famous line. If you all watched Matrix, you remember the whole scene where Morpheus is offering the red pill and the blue pill to Neo, and there's a line that's missing that seems kind of fundamental to what the movie's even about. And so he's kind of telling Neo, and the line doesn't exist anymore, so we're just trying to kind of piece it together from what people remember. And it starts out, "What if I told you?" And then it might say something to the extent that the world around you was not as it seems. And because it doesn't exist anymore, it's kind of difficult to pull it all together. But people remember the beginning part. And this one's a kind of weird one because, you know, we're talking about reality shifting and differences in how people perceive things. So, all right, let's move on. Well, let's say first of all, Moneybags and Recall Vector, you've done a ton of work on researching and pulling together all this stuff so that people can see residue and whatnot. So, big shout out. So the other one, if you know Sarah Jessica Parker's show in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was called Sex in the City. Now it's Sex and the City, which not too big of a change once again, but changes the idea of it. So the first idea, which if you ever saw previews of it before you ever saw it, you would remember that it was talking about what sex was like in the city and how it might be different than elsewhere. And Sex and the City, it just doesn't even roll off properly anymore. But you can find tons and tons and tons of residue out there. And Need Input, you've just done an amazing job pulling it all together. The other one that you did a good job on is pulling together the interview with a vampire instead of what it is now, interview with the vampire. And the residue on that, even the original author of the book and all the actors, and it's just, there's so much. And yeah. So if you've been on Need Input, you've also seen all the work he's done on the airplane changes. And once again, I think what God is trying to do with that one is show maybe how the plane actually functions. And what we're talking about here is when you look out the window, if you've ever been on a plane, think about where the engine nacelle is placed. So the engine, you know, the round thing in front. Like, so if you're looking out the window, where would it be in approximation of the wing? So I don't really want to tell you, well, I guess I have to, but so the engine, if you remember, was placed slightly in front of the wing, but not a terrible amount forward. And now it's so far forward it doesn't even seem structurally sound, so to speak. And I had to even check Die Hard, because I don't know if you remember the scene where they're fighting on the wing and the bad guy, you know, gets decked and falls and he gets sucked into the engine. Well, I had to watch that scene again because, you know, it seemed like he kind of just rolled into it and it wasn't like a big thing. Well, now he's just rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling, and eventually he gets into the front and, you know, gets sucked in. But at any point during that roll and roll and roll, he never slips to one side or the other. You know, it seems kind of odd. But if you've been studying any of the electrical aspects of the atmosphere and harmonics and tornadoes and how the airplane can slow down and speed up a little bit differently than we remember, and maybe doesn't require as much fuel as we thought to take off, and they actually have to power it down to not have the engines go haywire. So big shout out to Need Input. I mean, you're truly doing a great job there. Let's head over to some missing oddities. Travel Channel. So it had this show called Curious World that no longer exists, and people can remember episodes of it. And it was kind of around the turn of the millennia, and kind of like Ripley's Believe It or Not, but it was its own thing, and people have a lot of details on it if you want to go find out more about it. Alright, so Risky Business. Tom Cruise, he's got the house to himself and strips down to his underwear and, button-up shirt and socks. And so he's dancing to some music and slides across the floor, and he has another article that he's wearing, and it's kind of a famous thing. You can see everyone out there reenacting it, and it's a pair of Wayfarer sunglasses, and those are not there anymore. On that same note, you had the Raisin Bran Sun, the 2 scoops, you dump it, and it was all about the sun being able to make the raisins with all the good energy. And one of the funny things that he had was a pair of sunglasses, no longer there. And obviously you got California raisins that got sunglasses too, so that could be at play to some extent, but a lot of people do remember the sunglasses on the sun, and it was kind of saying he was even the golden sun was so powerful that even he needed sunglasses, which is kind of silly, but it was fun. And it kind of throws us a little bit into people remembering the yellow golden sun versus the more white sun that we have now. All right, next one. Got Uncle Pennybags from the Monopoly game. So a lot of us remember the monocle that he had on his. No, it wasn't doing a 666 there. Sorry. On his eye, and it just isn't there anymore. But yeah, everyone remembers it, and it was kind of a neat little thing. Okay, back to Star Wars again. You've got Vader. Now visualize his outfit. You got your cape, you got your mask, you got your chest plate with electrical equipment and breathing apparatus, and you got your big belt buckle, and he's always putting his thumbs on his belt, and big boots, big leather boots, and kind of had this form-fitting leather that had a kind of ribbed look to it. Well, if you know now, he also wears a dress. So underneath the cape, you have the kind of a tunic that goes sometimes mid-length down to the knees almost. And if you ever saw episode 3, it kind of looks like that, but it's kind of a mesh between the two, and it just doesn't even look right. And once you see it, you're going to see it everywhere in all of the movies, and it's just wrong. Oh, another one from Star Wars. You got C-3PO's silver leg, which nobody remembered, but it's all over the place now. All right, moving on. So we got Flintstones. So this one's kind of a fun one. Obviously, it's a play on words because you're talking about people who are cavemen, so to speak, and they have flint. And this is one that I didn't catch on to as a kid, but obviously everyone remembers. And well, at some point it was Flint Stones, then it became Flynn Stones, and now it's back to Flintstones. And people had Reddit boards where they were upset because it didn't have the T anymore, and then when they went back to go find the T, or the lack of the T, it wasn't there anymore, and it's just a whole bunch of shenanigans, but kind of a weird Oh, the Ford, you know, if you ever look at the logo, just visualize it here for a second. So visualize the F now with the little pigtail. And it's, in some places I've seen it in the past where it's almost as big as the O. So it almost says Ford. And once again, you know, with Ford, start looking into the past, you know, with Henry and where he gave money to maybe in countries in Europe. Moving on, talk about Febreze, or as we used to know it, Febreze. You also got LA Z-Boy, formerly known as Lazy Boy. You got the V-Dub, once again, kind of like Ford. Maybe there's something to look at there. The V-Dub now, there's no connection between them. And a lot of us saw that before we knew about all this memory stuff and just thought it was like an old logo that had changed. But once you look into it a little bit more, you realize it's always been disconnected. So the Fruit of the Loom, the cornucopia, is now missing, even though everyone remembers it being behind the fruit. Just looks odd. Moving on. So you got the Kit Kat. This one's really disturbing. So you've had Kit Kat recent campaign with new commercials with, you had Chance the Rapper doing the whole "we're both the rapper," and it's just weird play on words. And the next campaign they had was "Give me a break, give me a break, break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar." But every time they'd say "give me a break," they'd look at the screen, and they had an 80s one and a 90s one, and they're great commercials, but just very odd how they're looking at the camera every time they do the break. And I don't know what you want to make of that, but so we all remember a famous bear who, you know, had ads trying to help people with preventing forest fires. So if you remember, his name was Smokey the Bear. Well, that's not the case anymore. It's Smokey Bear, which obviously isn't a big change, but when you're talking about what we've been going through recently with all these wildfires, it might be something that God's trying to get us to look at, and maybe looking at the dew fires. And that's not a laughing matter. A lot of people have been hurt in this whole thing, and you can see with Paradise and these different cities missing people, and it's not a laughing thing. And that's something I think God is really trying to get us to look at, and saying only we can prevent forest fires, only you. Okay, let's move back a little bit to while we're on this dark forces at play. Got to talk a little bit about A-Team, the van. Obviously, we all remember being black with the red stripe, and now it's a three-tone black, red, and gray. It looks really odd. And the Howling Mad Murdoch, you also have the change where people remember two different names, and it's kind of an unusual name. And remember with A-Team, what they were dealing with was essentially being framed for something, and this is going back to Vietnam, and they were trying to clear their name. And we have a pretty good idea about the Get Smart clowns in America that were up to no good, you know, with the trafficking of drugs and things like that. So That might be why that has come up as a Mandela. And a little bit on a side note, you got 007's got a lot of problems too. So the famous quote that everyone really remembers is when James Bond introduces himself at different points. The villain or whoever is asking him the name, and he goes, "The name's Bond, James Bond," and it's very. I mean, you should be able to remember it. Well, it only was said that way in the more recent Daniel Craig movies, where he said it properly. But if you go back to all the old movies, it says, "My name is James Bond," or James Bond. It just sounds wrong. And also, if you know about Dolly and in the Moonraker movie, you remember that Jaws has his teeth. They're all metal, and he smiles at Dolly, and she's this younger woman that has the pigtails, and she smiles back at him, and we all remember that she smiles back and has braces, and so it kind of shows that they have some commonality, and they kind of have a connection, even though he's this huge, like 7.5, 8 foot tall guy, and she's 5'5" or 5'2", and they had that connection where they smile at each other, like each other, and that's missing now, and she just has kind of like darkened teeth. They're not, and the joke is completely missing from making any sense anymore. And later in the movie, they're up in space, and they've switched sides to help James Bond, and because they realize that they're going to be exterminated basically like everyone else, because they're not the perfect whatever that the bad guy wants. And so at some point they kiss, and when they pull back, their teeth get stuck together. And well, of course this isn't in the movie anymore because she doesn't have braces. And I've tried to search any kind of parody or teen drama movie to see if there's some similar scene, and I came up empty when I looked for it. So, but when I'd heard it on a board, the memory clicked back in, whereas you didn't really remember necessarily that aspect of the teeth. But as I was reading it, I didn't even finish the line, and I remembered the scene, and I filled it in before I even read the rest of the sentence. And so it was kind of a odd feeling to remember something that you thought you'd forgotten. I don't know. But I think with 007, it's once again kind of like A-Team. Like, maybe we need to look into these people who are up to no good. And another missing joke. So a lot of us remember Ed McMahon and how he used to hand deliver a big check to people's houses for, we thought, Publishers Clearinghouse. Well, if you look at official documentation and people, he never worked for them. He never delivered checks to anyone's house. He worked for, according to the official record, American Family Publishing, which, whatever. Not such a big deal, but the fact that the checks never were hand-delivered by him seems strange, since he was in a parody where he was actually going in a van to reclaim checks, and this is somewhere in the late 90s. So it wasn't too far, maybe about 10 years off from when these commercials used to run non-stop daytime. I did forget on the whole Jaws. Let's go back to Jaws. So he also, in the late 90s, early 2000s, did a commercial for Visa Mini, where he came up to the register and, he paid for his thing with a little Lisa Mini, and he's this big guy, and it's a tiny thing. And so there's a girl once again at the checkout stand, and when he walks away and he's paid for it, and he has his Visa card, she smiles at him, and she has braces, and he obviously had his bad teeth too, and so that was once again a parody joke about something that doesn't exist anymore, but everyone remembered it, because otherwise why would the joke make any sense? Okay, let's go on to the whole Shazam Kazam issue. So in this current time, there's only one movie that ever existed, and that's the Kazam one with Shaq, with, I believe it's one boy, and I think the story is basically he's kind of not necessarily using the genie wishes the best way, kind of. Usually in genie stories, even with Aladdin, you're talking about how you use the power to make a wish, and a good versus bad way of using them. And we'll come back to that in a second. So with Shazam, people remember it being Sinbad, the comedian, and he did a parody of it recently, but people remember at the time that there was two movies, and the Shazam had two kids where they had lost, I think, a parent or whatever, and he was trying to help them. And so the storylines between Shazam and Kazam are kind of different, and some people out there do remember that. If you do stumble across Jacob, Jared Jacks, he did put out a video where he went through his childhood experience in '94, where he'd seen it on an ABC special on like Sunday night, and he had a ton of details surrounding like what he was doing and whatnot in his life. Well, he had he did say that Tinkerbell did the whole wand thing as well, so she was there, even though that doesn't exist anymore either. But he said that he was talking with a neighborhood friend, and they were confusing the actors, and he said, well, can't you tell the difference between Shaq and Sinbad? I mean, they are different people, and he was making fun of him because he was a white kid that wasn't being racially sensitive, so to speak, as far as saying everyone looked the same or whatnot. And Jacob was laughing at his friend. So this is a personal memory of him remembering the friend screwing up and him razzing him about it. And it's one of those things where it's so clear in his mind that he remembers the story. And this goes back, 25 years, right? But yeah, that's a really good example. Go out and find that video and take a look. I mean, pretty cool video. All right, we gotta move on to song changes. Okay, so you have Phil Collins' "In the Air Tonight," very well-known song that has a lot of thought-out lyrics, and obviously the cool drum. The song that we remember was "In the Air Tonight," and the person singing, or the perspective he's giving, is that he's telling somebody to hold on, and everyone remembers this pretty well. But if you listen to the song now, it doesn't actually say that anywhere. You can find some analog versions that kind of sound like it, but you still have to kind of visualize in your mind to hear it. Well, now it says throughout the entire song, it says, "Oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord," in place of "Hold on." And it changes the structure of the song and what it means. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's just different. And when you're talking about what we are with the Mandela and what God's plan for knowing is, I think he's saying something through the song by saying, thinking about this structural change and what it means. Okay, moving on. Let's have a couple small ones. You got scorpions. We remember as winds of change. Now it's only wind of change, which is strange. Kansas, you have all we are is dust in the wind. And it is in the song that way, only in one part. The earlier part is all they are is dust in the wind, which, once again, isn't a significant change, but it does change the aspects of what you're trying to get across. And anyway, those are just a couple small ones. And obviously the refrain from "We Are the Champions of the World." So at the end of the song, it is missing, and it basically says "We are the champions," and the "of the world" is missing, yet it's all throughout the rest of the song. And so people, you can see videos where they're listening to the song and then they're going to say "of the world," and then it never happens. And it's just an odd one. Okay, moving on, we have Eurythmics. "Sweet dreams are made of these." So it's now "sweet dreams are made of this." And it just doesn't flow right as far as you're talking about dreams and how it's made of all these exciting things, and now you're only saying it's made of one thing. It just doesn't even make sense. If you're a fan of Jewel, you might know the song "Who Will Save Your Soul?" Well, it's now souls. So once again, if we're talking about God and what he might be trying to get across to us, what is our soul or our souls, like plural? And Moneybags did a nice job going through a bunch. 97 live version, she had Souls. 99 was Souls. 04 was Souls. 09 was it was just Soul. And then 16 was also just Soul. So, and those obviously around the 2012. So, I mean, if you want to throw that into the mix. Alright, so the famous musical Annie. You have the song "Tomorrow, tomorrow, you're only a day away." Well, obviously, that's how I remember it. But now it is "Tomorrow, tomorrow, you're always a day away." And once again, that fundamentally is not work, because you're saying that you're so close, you're only a day away. And now you're saying that you're always a day away, so you can never get to tomorrow. And that you're just held in place. And it just means something different. And if God is talking through this, I mean, I think you can kind of see where that might go. Alright, you got All in the Family. So you have the theme song, and they sing it at the beginning, and it is "Those were the days And you knew who you were then. Girls were girls, and men were men. And Moneybags found, obviously, the Roseanne Coolio clip where they have it, and the Sammy Davis Jr., where he also does. So the way it is now is very weird. So remember, it was, those were the days, and you knew who you were then. Alright, so the way it is now is, those were the days, and you knew who, and you knew where you were. So you basically went from and you knew who you were then to and you knew where you were then, which once again changes. So you knew where your location was versus who you were inside. So think about that. Like, in the past, you knew who you were, not where you were. That's not really necessarily as important. Okay. So I think what God is trying to do is get us to recall and see through maybe illusions that are out there, and pointing to some of these. I'm not saying all of them are nefarious, but maybe there are some that you need to look at closer, especially when you go down a rabbit hole looking at different aspects of people involved in I guess when we were on songs, but movies and TV shows, and yeah. So, and it is about trying to awaken and become aware, because you have people half remembering one memory and half remembering another, and sometimes it's even thirds where there's three different, and it's quite bizarre. And if you're talking about timelines and I guess even the shape of where we live. And okay, so the other aspect to really keep into consideration is end times, and there's supposed to be a famine for the word, and a few of us know about the Bible changes. So in Isaiah 11:6, most of us remember that a particular animal will lie with the lamb, and you can see depictions of it going all the way back. You can see Elvis singing about it. You see, gospel and stuff. So the way we remember it is the lion will lay with the lamb. Well, if you go through even King James, you can see that it's the wolf now will lay with the lamb. And, obviously they're both predators, and not necessarily structurally change it too much, saying that they're not eating the lamb next to them. But if you throw in the whole aspect that a wolf, you also have the whole wolf in sheep's clothing, in your head, that maybe it has some actual change. And it's not to say I love wolves and dogs, and obviously they're great creatures, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about how the wolf in sheep's clothing might play into the fact that this has changed. And it's obviously something different, but just keep it in mind. Now you also have John 14:6. So the way people remember it is, I am the way, the truth, the light. Nobody cometh to the Father except through me. Now, there's a bunch of obviously variations of wordplay, but the thing that's changed that is really weird is I am the way, the truth, so we said light, now it's the life. Nobody cometh to the Father except through me. So, once again, light to life. Hope I got that right. It doesn't mean the same thing, and the other stuff can be kind of overlooked a little bit, but that's one there that it's a very well-known Bible verse. So just, go start looking at these. There's a lot of other ones. You also have the fact that words are showing up in the Bible people don't remember, like matrix, and now unicorns in there a bunch of times, King James Version. And these are obviously mystical creatures, and even in the real world we're seeing all these things none of us remember from school, like the narwhal, and that's a unicorn in the water. Looks like those little whales in Florida. Manatee. Kind of looks like a manatee with a horn on it, like a unicorn. And you have, in our real world now, you have double rainbows, and you can go also to the end of a rainbow and walk in it. Which, it's just totally bizarre. You can find video on it, and obviously the whole idea of finding a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and the leprechaun, it obviously doesn't mean anything anymore, because you can actually go to the end of the rainbow. It just, once again, doesn't make any logical sense. So you also have the whole Yanni Laurel thing going on, where you can hear the same audio clip, and some people will hear Yanni, some will hear Laurel. Now, people were also thinking that the audio equipment could be affecting how they hear it, and that may be true to some extent, but some of us were able to hear Yanni and Laurel at different times from same equipment. So from that experience, Yanni was very clear, and when you heard Laurel, it was very clear. It wasn't like your mind was unsure of which it was. Like, it was very clear when you heard it audibly. So that's one to think about. And on a side note, Moneybags also, you had that whole Green Needle brainstorm mind game. That kind of plays into that too, where you can kind of visualize in your mind before you hear something, and pretty cool. I mean, that could be more about audio than the Yanni Laurel, because that one seemed very clear, where you weren't even trying to make it be one or the other. And it kind of also, the whole blue and black dress versus white and gold dress, sometimes you can maybe say it's the equipment, but it could be just the difference in how we visualize. It's not necessarily, these aren't memory things, but it's just an interpretation of what you're seeing. So a couple miscellaneous that I forgot about. Just beware of false flags on this. You got people thinking it might be CERN or D-Wave computers, and it might be some things happening in that, but I really think God is trying to focus us on certain things with the Mandela. And you can kind of see this even with the JFK assassination. So visualize in your mind the car and how many rows of seats it is, how many people are in the car, and a lot of people do remember 3 rows. You had 2 people in the front row, and John and Jackie in the back. And there was kind of a gap row. Well, now there's 6 people in there, and there's variations in people's memory, but if you go look at the official video, there's 6. And once again, that's something that I think God's really trying us to look into, how he might have been taken out. And I guess bring some justice to what happened to him, his brother, Martin Luther King, you know, really try to help restore some faith in how people view safety and doing things by rule of law instead of by force and violence. Oh, one last one. If you're somebody who really likes spelling bees and memorizing vocabulary, so a lot of us remember silent letters in different words, and there was a particular one. So the word dilemma had a silent letter. So the way it's officially, well, we'll get to the official in a second. So the way we remember is D-I-L-E-M-N-A. And now it is spelled D-I-L-E-M-M-A, which is grammatically how it sounds. But in school, we remember, okay, so this is a dilemma. You would say dilemma in your head, but you would know it was dilemma. And you can find, it's half and half on this. There's a website that tracks this, and people, you know, say what they remember. But teachers were teaching it, and all sorts of things going way back. So that one, because of the whole Mandela thing, it seems to really play into, we're in a dilemma. Like, are these memories here to teach us something? Are they misrememberings, which some people might go down that path, but then how come you have half the population remember it one way, half the other? So it is, we are in a dilemma, and trying to grapple what this is all about. And even going back to Mandela. So did he die in prison in the 80s, the 90s? Was there a funeral? Or did he die recently in 2013, 14, whatever? Recently. And if you're aware of the 90s a little bit, Mandela was kind of a big deal in teaching, like, you know, how to end apartheid and all that sort of stuff. And he was president, and there was a movie about soccer that it's got to be the late 90s, early 2000s, where they had him in it. Not him, but reenactment. And so it was kind of a big deal. So most of us at that time remember him being alive, but many people remember him dying in the 80s, and you can find stuff on it. So that's kind of where that idea has come from, and you can do your own research. All right, let's get into some daytime drama. So over on Y&R, got to talk about the Valentine's episode a little bit with Phyllis and Nick. Guys did a great job there. I mean, Gina, you're just showing off your talent, your beauty, and making something realistic feeling. And obviously Joshua, you know, doing a great job as always. And then moving into Phyllis turning on the girls, but trying to help them. You know, the Pretty Little Liars, you know, they're all arrested, and She's going to be in the doghouse. It looks like she's getting kicked out. But I do think they'll mend it at some point, and she'll try to turn it back around. It's quite ironic that she's the one that got them to all make the pact, and yet she's the one that broke first. The flashback episode for Nikki for the 40th, that was of her character, great. Nice to see a lot of stuff I hadn't even seen, and absolutely beautiful woman. Great to see your transformation as far as a character throughout the years. Seeing Jeannie Cooper, it's hard to see. She's been gone for a little while now, but just such a big part of the show, and we really miss you. And Christoph St. John, also very, very hard. We watched you for years. A lot of love for you. Even though we don't know you personally, there's a transcendence, I guess, of what kind of messages with your plot lines that you and the writers worked on together to help people, and it really shines through what you were able to tackle, and we're all really going to really miss you, but I know you're listening, and you have a certain place in our minds and hearts that we go to think about things, and even though you're not going to be with us, you are. Over on GH, you have the whole twins memory thing coming out that we all saw coming. So obviously with Jason and Drew, you had the patient 6 thing going on, and the memory mapping, and fits in with things here. The twins mirroring each other and being able to know what the other one knew. And you had the other 2 sets. You had Alex and Anna, and Kevin and what's on my mind here? Kevin and, his serial killer brother. So they all had the eye thing and lost their sight. And we knew that Drew and Jason were going to lose it at some point because the connections were just all there. And obviously you saw Jason collapse down the stairs, not being able to help Sam when she was undercover trying to figure out Shiloh and the cult and all that kind of stuff, what they're up to. And that was just the end of Friday. Drew also lost his sight and ran. He was driving his car and almost, it looks like he run into the chief of police, and she's obviously tied up in the Franco. So Franco pled guilty under he's basically trying to help the cops in getting the bad guy, the serial killer, and she's one of the only ones that knows. But he's also in Ferncliff, and so he might be able to save Laura and Kevin while he's there. We'll find out, see. I love how Elizabeth's able to believe in Franco even though he pled guilty, and she knows he's not guilty, and it's going to work out real nice. Okay, over on Bold, you got Bill's back with a vengeance and trying to put the family back together, showing all the love, and I like what he did trying to get Wyatt to come back, because Wyatt's thinking about how he can help Sally get back Spectra fashions, and she was wronged obviously when the whole building collapsed on her, and her business was stolen and all that, and so that was all Bill's fault with against Liam, and so it's going to be exciting to see since Bill has agreed to this, that Sally Spectre is going to get her fashion house back and pedal to the metal. I think it's going to be awesome. All right, so trust the plan, be the plan, and where we go one, we go all.
Tell me you love me. Let me hear you say you never leave me. Ooh, girl, that would make me feel so right. Let me hear you tell me you want me. Let me hear you say you'll never leave me, baby, until the morning light.